To the April 26, 2022 meeting of the Planning Commission for the City of Monterey. On the agenda tonight, we have two main items. One is a consent agenda with the only item being the minutes, and one is a agendized topic, which is the proposed ordinance for wireless communication facilities in the city. We'll begin with a call to order and a roll call.
First, we have Chair Freeman,
Present.
Vice Chair Reed,
Present.
Chair Brassfield,
Present.
Commissioner Dawson,
Here.
Commissioner Fletcher,
Here.
Commissioner Latassa,
Present.
and Commissioner Milich.
Awesome.
Thank you. We have all members present today, and for staff here today, we have Community Development Director Kim Cole, City Attorney Christine Davi, and myself, Recording Secretary Jennifer Cleary.
And for those of you who are in the public in the audience, Commissioners Milich, Brassfield, Fletcher, and Reed are joining us via Zoom today. And I guess the Hollywood squares are going to be right up there so you can see them. Let's begin then with the consent agenda, which is the one from April the 12th, 2022. Is there any need to remove it from the consent agenda? Comments from commissioners?
Move to accept as presented.
All
I'll
right.
second that.
Motion has been made and seconded to accept the minutes as presented for April the 12th. Any comment on the motion?
My only comment is I missed the evening session, but I am still going to vote for this. So because I was there for the afternoon session.
All right then.
Ditto.
Okay, for the vote, we have Chair Freeman,
Approve.
Vice Chair Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Brassfield,
Approve.
Commissioner Dawson,
Yes.
Commissioner Fletcher,
Yes.
Commissioner Latassa,
Yes.
Commissioner Milich.
Yes.
Thank you. And one more question, Commissioner Reed, if you could, if you watched the whole video or listened to the whole recording of that previous meeting?
Why would I do that? There was no need to do that. There's nothing on this agenda that was needed to watch for future meetings.
No, this was for the approval of the minutes, April 12th.
I know, but I was there. I can still vote. It's not, I don't have to recuse myself. There is no requirement to recuse myself, even though I missed, because I can't vote on half the minutes. There's not 2 minutes. There's just one set of minutes.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. These minutes passed with a vote of 7. Oh, sorry about that.
Thank you, Jennifer. And that is public comment for items not on the agenda. So if you're in the audience or at home calling in and you have something to say about something that's not on the agenda, this is your moment. Jennifer is going to explain how you can do that.
And isn't it also something that has to be within the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission?
Okay.
Members of the public are encouraged to join our meetings via a secure connects you live, no lag time. This meeting is also streamed on youtube.com/City of Monterey with a 10-second delay and Comcast channel 25 with up to a 90-second delay. If you would like to provide public comment, please join the meeting using Zoom or by telephone, making sure to join in time to accommodate delays. To join the Zoom meeting from a computer or phone, use the link or phone numbers on the agenda posted at isearchmonterey.org. Since the meeting, you will find the agenda under the Recent tab. To join by telephone, dial 833-568-8864 toll-free. Once again, that phone number to call is 833-568-8864, toll-free. If the first number doesn't work, please try another. There are more listed on the meeting agenda at isearchmonterey.org. The webinar ID for this meeting is 161-990-8039. Once again, the webinar ID to join this meeting is 161-990-8039. If prompted for a participant ID, press pound. Detailed instructions for using Zoom are available at monterey.org/public meetings. To provide public comment via Zoom, please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen. To provide comments by phone, dial *9 to raise your hand, then *6 to unmute when called upon. Public commenters will be announced using their last 3 phone number digits or the name typed into Zoom. Public commenters will be muted until it is their turn to speak. Please turn off TV or computer speakers or go to another room while connected, as background noise interferes with the broadcast. Public speakers will be called upon in order of hands raised. There is a 3-minute time limit for this meeting, so please stay within that time frame. And we do have a hand raised. I just want to clarify, this is for items not on the agenda today. I have the phone number with the last 3 digits, 564. You should be able to unmute.
Is this the only one coming in from the outside, Jennifer?
Currently, yes. Oh,
All right.
sorry. Should we ask the?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there anyone in the audience here in the council chamber who has a comment on an item not on the agenda? Take the people in person first. Seeing as we don't have one, let's let the phone caller talk right now.
Thank you, and my apologies. Again, we have the phone number with the last 3 digits, 564. Oh, I might have just muted you.
Muted.
This is Nina Beatty. Timing is everything, as the city manager knows, as the director of community services knows. And when meetings, important meetings, are scheduled for the afternoon, the community is blocked. People that work are not able to attend. And so the subject of those meetings is buried. And yet this has been done repeatedly. This is not mysterious or an odd event. It happens repeatedly. And there hasn't been any accountability about this. The city also seems to be initiating plans like the compatible use plan without transparency, violating the terms of the request for proposals that was initiated in 2020. And these plans have the potential to not just change, but damage the character, the quality, and the environment of this beautiful land. Having a contractor also that repeatedly makes major mistakes that's been documented. That benefits applicants, but not benefits the public. These sorts of actions don't give any confidence that City Hall is engaging in appropriate conduct, is following the rules, and that there's any accountability for these actions that seem to benefit powerful special interests, but they harm or ignore the public and local small businesses. And I asked the Planning Commission to do something about these actions. At this point, I don't have any confidence in city leadership. I see these continuing actions by city leadership that demonstrate indifference to the public. And having, for instance, this meeting scheduled at the time that it is just one more example in many examples of lack of accountability and lack of responsibility and respect for the public in doing the public's business, because that's what this meeting is about. It's the public's business.
Thank you, Mrs. Beatty. Should be noted that all of the city council meetings begin at 4 o'clock. Our first public appearance item, if there are no other comments about items not on the agenda, we have one item, and that is to consider recommending an ordinance to the city council amending City Code Chapter 38, Article 17, Section 112.4, related to wireless communication facilities, exempt from CEQA Article 19, Sections 15305 and 15308, Classes 5 and 8. And for those of you who are not familiar with the way our meetings work, we divide this into 4 sections. The first is a staff presentation and commissioner questions for staff. The second one part is if there is an applicant, he or she gets to make a presentation. And then the main body of discussion is we will open public comment for this item. And then we will close public comment and open commissioner comments. So that's sort of the order of play. And we'll begin now with a staff presentation.
Thank you, Chair Freeman. Before I get started, I'm just going to check that our online commissioners can see my presentation.
Yes.
Great, thank you. As the chair introduced, this afternoon, we're introducing to you the wireless ordinance. Based on the amount of public comments that we've received, we'll be recommending continuance of this item to a future meeting, so we have an opportunity to work through all of the public comments and potentially bring back additional changes to the ordinance, or at least address the comments that have been raised. So in background, the City Council appointed a wireless subcommittee that met for almost 2 years reviewing the wireless ordinance. We had long meetings, televised. If you're interested, you can go back and listen to those. Some of those lasted 5 and 6 hours long on days. All right, let's just wait. It looks like somebody's joining our meeting, and okay, I'll try again. So the wireless subcommittee discussed and revised an ordinance developed by a citizens group, and this is a fairly unusual process for ordinances in our community. Most ordinances are drafted by legal staff with given general direction. So this started with a citizens group that submitted an ordinance to the city that the wireless subcommittee then reviewed for about 2 years. Staff has now completed its legal and administrative review of the draft ordinance, and the ordinance that you see before you is that revised document. What we did do is we included as attachment 2, there's a line out strikeout version of the ordinance, so you can see the changes that were made to the ordinance. And just for clarification, I know one member of the public asked me, why are there different colors? Why are some blue? Why are some red? And that's simply because our team met over a series of days and times, and each time we revised the ordinance, it had it in a different color. So there's no priority to those changes. It really is just as we worked through the ordinance and we're able to make the presentation to you this evening. So where did wireless facilities start and where are they today? We actually have a lot of wireless facilities in the city of Monterey, and most of them are building mounted, a lot of them on our taller buildings in town, some of our hotels, some of our larger buildings in the Ryan Ranch area. And then we do have one tower in our city, which this tower is at 2200 Garden Road. This is a view from the parking lot of that building. It's barely visible from Highway 68. So I'll say the older facilities that we've seen in our community are considered more macro facilities. They have a wider distribution area for their signal, and the technology is quite frankly changing. The one utility mounted pole that we have in the city, this is on Wave Street. And this is very typical of wireless facilities. It has an antenna at the top of a utility pole, along with some sort of equipment cabinet attached to the pole. And I'm sure you've been listening and watching sort of what's happening in bigger cities. Entire systems of these have been installed in San Francisco and the San Jose area. I think it's also important to note that it's not just one company that's going to be installing these facilities. We have multiple companies that provide wireless service, and each company will be providing its own network. So I'm going to summarize the ordinance. This was also included in your staff report. The proposed ordinance continues to require use permits for all proposed and modifications to wireless facilities. I think, at least my perception, I know we have at least 2 committee members on the Planning Commission. One of the things we heard from the public over and over again is that they wanted a public process for all wireless facilities. This is different than many communities in California are doing for eligible facilities requests, those that are subject to a 60-day shot clock. Many cities are creating administrative processes for these applications. Our community wanted a transparent and public process. So as you know, we come to you with 60-day shot clocks so that you review the application and it could possibly go on appeal to City Council. So I want to just point that out. This is a opportunity for the public to speak on every use permit application in the city of Monterey. What does the review process look like? There is a voluntary pre-submittal conference. I've sat through many of those at this point where we go through the submittal requirements and compare the project against those requirements. Ultimately, the application is submitted. If it's hopefully deemed complete at that first submittal, we schedule it for a planning commission hearing. And as I mentioned, there's a couple different timeframes that we have to process applications in. Most of the applications we're seeing today have to be processed within 60 days to comply with FCC regulations. If the application is incomplete, this ordinance proposes a new clause in that the director can deny the applicant or application without prejudice. So we're trying to do our incomplete reviews in a day to 2 days. Most applications, if you're familiar with, we have 30 days under law. We're not doing that for wireless applications because of the shot clock. Every day we take on the incomplete application review takes or removes, reduces the amount of overall time we have to process that application. So they are different than any other type of application that we're required to process here in the city. We are recommending that we post all applications online within 5 working days of filing or soon thereafter as practical. The draft that was submitted by the subcommittee recommended 3 working days. And now, having done this for almost 2 years since that original draft was produced, that's almost impossible for us to meet administratively every time. With people out sick, with vacations, with just trying to get information online, within 5 working days is a goal that we can achieve administratively. One of the key changes in the submittal requirements, I think as you look through them, they've been substantially increased or clarified. The ones change between the subcommittee draft and the draft that's in front of you today is the elimination of mock-up installations. We have done that, and they've proved to be very difficult. The reason is, and I'll give you an example, at 200 Glenwood Circle, which is the residential care facility building next to Highway 68, it's a 5 to 6 story building. The antennas were to be mounted on the side of the building. In order to achieve that, they had to obtain full building permits in order to attach the mock-ups to the side of the building so that they didn't, have any failure, potentially fall off the building 5 to 6 stories down or blow into areas that we wouldn't want them to blow into, like traffic lanes and those types of things. The ones that we're going to see in the future are going to be on utility poles. We clearly can't put them on existing operating utility poles. We did discuss at the subcommittee level, and initially I thought it was achievable to have a utility pole installed somewhere in the city and then have items attached to it. But it's very clear to me now, after working with our building department, we would have to have structural reports, inspections, attachments, and for a submittal requirement, I don't believe that's achievable.
Kim, this is Hanson. Sorry to interrupt. Just a quick question. And this is I'm going to try and phrase it as a point of a question. My original understanding of the mock-ups was not that it was actually going to be installed on a building or installed on a pole, but that the mock-up, for example, if you were doing the one that was on top of a utility pole, you would bring a small mock-up in, meaning the real size, but not actually put it on a pole 30 feet in the air for us to review. It was to show what the real size was so that we can really see the real size, not the, my recollection of this was that this was the recommendation from outside counsel on this, that one of the ways to make sure that we can do this is we can do the mock-ups. But again, this was a long time ago. What my understanding was, or my recollection was, it was not going to be putting something 40 feet or 30 feet up on a building, but it was to show the planning commission, this is what the real size is, not the mock-up on a building. And then that's just, and am I missing that, or am I completely wrong?
That's different than my understanding of the mock-ups. The mock-ups were intended to be installed on the building so people could see in the field what the impact was. We did have discussions as we broadened that to utility poles, that it's not possible to install them on utility poles currently in use with electrical lines and everything else. And so we discussed whether or not a separate pole, as I mentioned, could be installed somewhere in the city and these items installed. We talked about, cordoning off areas of Via Paraiso Park, large areas. So if the pole, I don't know, it just does not seem, our recommendation is not to go down that path. Don't see that as really a feasible alternative. One of the things, and I know the Planning Commission's very well aware of this, the cities can regulate location design and development standards. We can't regulate technology. And so the new ordinance divides our standards into 4 categories for those off the public right-of-way. So basically on private property, building mounted, freestanding towers outside of the public rights-of-way or public rights-of-way. So off the public right-of-way, I don't think this is that different than we do today. We try to look for concealment elements so the facilities are not readily visible. The height limit shouldn't exceed the height limit of the zoning district. The facility cannot encroach into the site setbacks. We should permit co-location, so we don't have multiple towers. If we can co-locate, let's do that. We require noise reports for all facilities that evaluate equipment boxes and whether or not it'll meet the city's noise standards. If the facility does require lights or some sort of safety lighting, that it's on motion sensitive, controllers of some sort. There's limitations on signage, fencing. The city has the ability to require landscaping. One of the things we don't talk about in our current ordinance, but the proposed ordinance does, is a requirement for flat rate electric metering. And then also any ground equipment should be concealed with opaque fences or landscape features. That's proposed in the ordinance. When you get to the building mounted facilities, this is a lot of language, but it basically talks about facilities should be concealed and architecturally integrated into the buildings. There is a concern about building mounted facilities that this is a clause that the city will not approve unscreened rooftop wireless communication facilities if the applicant has the right to increase the facility height so the equipment would become visible to the public from view from the ground level on adjoining properties or the public rights of way. So we have some restrictions in that particular area. Facade mounted, once again, we're trying to conceal those behind existing screen walls. And for the most part, I think as you drive around our town, I don't think you really see a lot of our wireless facilities. The ones on top of the Marriott are sort of at the very top of the building. Many of them are behind screening walls. That's the same is true for the Portola Hotel and a lot of the buildings in Ryan Ranch. So freestanding towers outside of the right of way, sort of like the one that I showed you. We're encouraging now stealth architectural features, and there's a bunch of different options. We do have one flagpole in the city that's a wireless facility, and that's as you go into Del Monte Center on your right. You may see that flagpole. But, you know,
Kim, there's actually 3 flagpoles at the Hyatt that are also cell towers.
right, I forgot about those. You're right. Thank you. That's good. I forgot a wireless application. Must not have been
Way to go.
too ingrained. And then, you know, trying to make sure that any faux structures are sort of integrated into the landscape. So I think the most significant changes are our ordinance where we start to talk about the public right of way. Wireless companies have the right to install their facilities on all sorts of infrastructure in the right of way, most notably utility poles. And those are, many of those are owned jointly amongst all the utility companies, and they have the right to install their facilities on them. But we have the ability to indicate our preferences. What are our design preferences for those facilities? So I think this really moves us into what our preferences are that have been developed. And I think these are really important for you to think about. The first preference is city-owned or controlled parcels outside of open space residential or historic overlay districts. Those could be our parking garages. Those could be basically city-owned parcels, but not our facilities in the public right-of-way. Industrial districts, commercial districts, once again, trying to ensure these facilities are in industrial and commercial areas versus residential areas. And then city-owned or controlled parcels other than listed above. And then non-preferred areas are predominantly our residential areas. We're trying to encourage our wireless providers to locate it in commercial and industrial districts and not in our residential area to provide future service.
Quick question, Kim. Do elementary, junior high, and high schools constitute residential areas or commercial? What does that fall?
So schools are interesting because, and Ms. Stavi may have more to provide, but they are under their own jurisdiction in terms of regulations with the school districts govern those properties. And it's my understanding, although it's one of the comments we received, that city's jurisdiction over school districts is limited to like stormwater improvements offsite, as well as traffic improvements. So if they're doing development that may affect stormwater or public works traffic improvements offsite, then we have the ability to comment on and regulate that in some form. I don't believe, based on what I know today, that we're able to regulate cell facilities on school district properties. And the same would hold true for our federal properties. We would have even less control. So I know that's pending. I don't know if you're ready, Chrissy, to provide any additional comment.
Yeah, your comments are correct. The school district does have the ability to exempt itself from local zoning regulations by a supermajority vote. If they do that, the exemption needs to apply to classroom facility use. Classroom facilities has been broadly defined under case law, such as to include the football stadium, for example. For example, that's what's happened with the football stadium lights at Monterey High. You might have read about some of that issue. So if there were a wireless application that the high school wanted to install for classroom facilities, And if they exempted themselves from local zoning regulation, the city may have some control over grading and drainage and other things of that nature, but not over whether or not it's placed on their property.
And the post office, federal facility?
I did not research the federal facility, but I do believe that's accurate. I think it's been looked at previously with respect to NPS, and that would comport with my understanding that yes, they have their own control. We do have some jurisdictional reciprocity agreements, but that don't pertain to wireless facilities.
Okay. Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's okay. So this is the first thing to really understand. We're going to continue to promote these in our industrial, not promote, encourage them to be located first in our industrial and commercial areas and our non-residential neighborhoods. And then within those districts, you know, where do we want to see them first and where do we want to see them last? And so what we're saying or proposing that if there are within those districts, to first see them on existing towers or similar large vertical structures within or upon existing support structure. So existing facilities, try to put them on existing towers and then building mounted facilities with rooftop mounted antennas, try to put them on buildings. And then building mounted facilities with facade mounted antennas. We want them on the roof first. You can't do it on the roof, then let's look on the side of the building. Then looking at new towers or supporting structures, once again, typically on private property. And then existing or replace supporting structures where the facility can be camouflaged. And then replacement on existing or replacing support structures other than buildings where the wireless communications facility is not stealth or camouflaged, or a new non-stealth small wireless facility's height above ground level is the lower of 35 feet or the height of the closest utility poles. We're sort of saying that's our last option of preference within that. I think the commission's very well aware of the issue of radio frequency reports and emissions. Cities cannot regulate or create standards for emissions. That's completely under the regulations of I believe the FCC. And the wireless facilities must comply with the FCC standards. And as part of current applications, the applicants are submitting their RF analysis to the city. It's a stamped document by a licensed engineer. And then the city outsources peer review of these calculations to a licensed independent consulting engineer. So we have the documents peer reviewed to ensure that they comply with FCC standards. So we don't just rely on the applicant's submittal. We've received quite a few public comments. And so I'll apologize in advance. I've just tried to summarize these comments so you can get a flavor of them and start thinking about them. We had a letter from Ron Beck who encouraged us to provide or require 1,000 foot, it should say foot, setbacks from homes and schools. He's interested in a pole fall zone adjacent to any new facility. That our submittal requirements should require a site survey, including everything from topography to other, items on the property. He's wants notice for temporary cell towers. And there's a lot of the different commenters talk about this evidence of effective prohibition and language that they would like to see in the ordinance. Encouraging stealth designs and then independent review of of radio frequency reports. Mr. Dory's comments were very similar. Bob Evans and David Breedlove recommended increased enforcement, referencing some concern about some of the wires that have been installed in the city. Ms. Dodderer's and Ms. Hollenbeck's comments were very similar to Mr. Beck's in terms of theme. Ms. Jett said the ordinance needs strong and evidentiary standards. encourage that city staff must handle applications, not consultants, and eliminate any administrative decision-making. Ms. Marcus does not want the city to issue permits for wireless near residences. Mr. Myers wants the city to require applicants to provide verification methods, the actual measurements from structures, antennas, and building elevations and in relationship to topography. So the RF reports that are submitted, not only do they are supposed to show compliance with FCC regulations, but all their calculations and how they determined that. That there should be a city-appointed RF engineer to review applications. Oh, I'm sorry, that's my typo there about Monterey Vista Neighborhood Association I have below. Then Susan 9 was concerned about the extensive changes to the subcommittee draft ordinance. She wants the city to require mock-ups, to possibly hire Andrew Campanelli to review the ordinance, concern about impacts to historic structures, recommends certified mailed notices, and to require site surveys. The Monterey Vista Neighborhood Association actually submitted 2 letters, and so did Ms. 9. She submitted 2 letters. MVNA submitted 2 letters. They would like notice for any temporary cell towers that we currently require a structural analysis, but they want a safety certification with a wind load analysis. They want to require mock-ups of all facilities. Applications need to be online in 3 days. They have some concerns about language changes from shall to shoulds. Request changes to effective prohibition language, and that's similar to, they had a very specific language that they're interested in. Oops. And they actually, I think I actually included it here. Technically sufficient and conclusive proof that the proposed location is necessary for the provision of wireless services to substantial areas of the city. And really what that's getting at is in our areas that are sort of our discouraged, prohibited areas where, you know, we're not supposed to be putting these in residential. They're asking for, not only the ordinance asks for an explanation of the effective prohibition on service, so they can justify why they would need to locate in an area that we as a city don't want them to locate. And they're requesting specific language in that. Paula O'Connor opposes cell towers near schools and residences. Lori Putnam wants us to consider abandoned or decommissioned equipment within a facility as still in use, to consider strengthening enforcement, clarify status of permits issued before the revised ordinance is approved. Pat Venza is interested in the city requiring drive-by tests to prove there's a proof of gap or prohibition in service, and that the city conduct a yearly drive-by test by the city or a hired contractor to look at service levels in our community. Requests the need for mock-ups, and she also provided a video link to Mr. Campanelli's information about wireless facilities. So as you can see, we've received quite a bit of public comment in the last few days. And Verizon, so Mr. Albitron submitted a number of concerns about the proposed ordinance. He contends that eligible facilities, so those that have to be reviewed within 60 days, should only require administrative approval, that a use permit is inappropriate, that the requirement for a master plan for small cells violates federal requirements, that a requirement to submit information supporting a claim would violate federal law. He says we should delete that requirement. The denial that I mentioned, if an application's incomplete, he doesn't find appropriate, but that instead the city should issue multiple incomplete letters as necessary. Then the next several requirements have a lot to do with the size of the equipment itself. He's suggesting that our ordinance allow 3 cubic feet for each antenna and 28 cubic feet for associated equipment, that we need to allow a 10-foot height increase over the basic zoning requirement for all facilities, allow a new pole if there's no feasible existing or replacement option within 500 feet, allow 5 cubic feet of equipment on a streetlight pole or 16 feet on a utility pole, that we need to allow multiple antennas above or on the side of the pole, allow protrusion of equipment housing be increased from 15 to 22 inches from the pole, allow new pole designs as envisioned by Verizon, eliminate preference for city-owned or controlled poles, that the city cannot require an effective prohibition showing for small cells, and that the city cannot require a permit term. I think the draft ordinance requires or includes a 10-year permit term. So where does that leave us? I think obviously we've continued to receive a lot of public comment about this. I'm recommending that you open today's hearing, that you receive public comment, that we'll record those comments in addition to what we've received in writing, that in advance of the next meeting, we need to, as a team, go through all of those comments and find and make recommendations to you on what we think can and cannot be incorporated. And then hopefully, I think that, originally I was going to try for the first meeting in May. I just don't think we can publish a report by next week and be ready. So I'm recommending, contingent upon people's schedules, that May 24th of 2022, we would continue this item too.
I'll arrange to be gone.
Thank you, Kim. Just to remind everybody, the whole purpose of this meeting is to review the proposed amendments to the city code regarding personal wireless services, and the Planning Commission could accept, could choose not to recommend these amendments to the City Council, or the Planning Commission could recommend modifications to the draft ordinance. And I think what Kim is saying is that with the number of public comments, the likelihood is that we will recommend modifications to the draft ordinance. I read the first page, at least, of all 18 letters, and there are some consistent themes, but now I think the first order of business is for commissioners to ask Kim questions before we go to public comment. Want to start?
Sure. Thanks, Kim, for your typically excellent presentation. And thanks also to the subcommittee staff and the public for all this diligence. It's really appreciated. This is complicated stuff. So the first question is about consultants who work for the city. So when the process is the pre-application meeting, which is a great idea. Once an applicant submits what they think is a complete application, the city gives itself 5 days to decide whether it's complete or not.
So we're actually trying to do that incomplete review as fast as we can. So some of them have been longer, but most recently we've been completing our incomplete review in about a day to 2 days. And it also just depends on when that application comes in. The 5 days that we're talking about is we are reviewing that application for completeness and then working with our administrative staff to post all of the documents online.
Okay.
And so that's what's the 5 days is
5
for.
days, right. So we have RF engineers and attorneys who are sort of on call as applications come in. And so the first question is the fee that the applicant pays covers basically those sort of on-call professionals, the engineers and the lawyers who are reviewing the application. But then there's also a whole description in the draft ordinance about that if special consultants have to be hired, there's a deposit and there's a whole process for paying outside third-party engineers. So that's that. There's sort of like two different. You hear what I'm saying? There's like the application that includes these consultants that the city already is working with, but then there's another sort of step up level of
Actually,
consulting.
maybe I can just clarify. We treat these applications like we do all use permits. And so for major use permits in the city, it requires a $4,000 deposit. And that deposit covers staff time as well as the RF peer review engineers work, as well as we've hired an outside planning consultant to help us process these permits and answer questions. So we bill against that $4,000. Most of our applications have been coming in right about that amount that per site. So we treat it, and that's how we handle every use permit in the city of Monterey.
Okay.
They're all handled the same way.
Okay, great. So my next question is about the shot clock issue. I didn't see much discussion of the shot clock in the ordinance, the draft ordinance. And I know that's of major concern because the FCC has given us such a short amount of time to approve projects. So I was wondering if there had been any discussion of I don't know, some sort of description of the shot clock in relation to the application process. In other words, when it stops and starts. So it's sort of like almost like the city is holding a stopwatch. And when there's a certain number of days that run through, I think it's a 60-day limit in this case. And then
And it's cumulative, right?
right.
If it takes us 3 days and then they resubmit and it takes us 3 days, well, that's 6 days off the shot clock as I understand it.
Yeah.
So it's unlike, as an architect, you typically have 30 days, you resubmit and we get another 30 days. Wireless applications are not like that. It's a cumulative shot clock.
So for instance, if an application is accepted as complete, then that clock that is still running. They haven't pushed the tab on the stopwatch yet, and it just keeps on going till they get approval from from the city for planning.
Correct. And then the appeal counts within that 60 days as well.
Yeah, right. So if there is a denial of a project, because there's a director denial and then there's planning commission denial, of course, city council denial. Those are the three sort of possibilities of denials. Do those stop the shot clock?
I see. We have multiple attorneys online that
We sure
maybe can help me with that answer. So
Well, maybe the purpose for this question is would there be any logic to try to include this shot clock rules as part of the ordinance? Or did you avoid that on purpose? Is that too thorny?
Personally, I disfavor codifying what's already the law. We don't need to codify every state law that's been adopted. We could just look at
Okay.
the state law. So I think it's duplicative and burdensome and can lead to confusion. So we just have to be familiar with the laws that are applicable and don't need to separately codify it.
So for instance, whether or not a denial stops the clock is law that attorneys know. I don't know. I mean, I think it's a good question. So
Yeah.
is that defined in federal law? That whole shot clock stop and start business?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so you understand my question is it would help the applicant and it helps the public understand this whole shot clock thing and,
So I'll let you know the applicants are bird dogging us.
yeah,
They're very aware of when they submit and they resubmit and they remind us exactly how much time we have left. And that's, they're clearly in the driving seat with the shot clock.
yes. right.
And it's just what it is. So
Okay, so it sounds like there's no reason to add any more language. Shot clock is what it is, and we have to play by federal rules that are well defined.
yes.
Okay. So then I have some, just sort of questions about the report, the draft ordinance, if that's
Let me
okay?
just grab my computer.
Okay. I mean, it seems like this is the time for that. I don't want to be too ridiculous here. Okay, so packet page 26, right in the middle of the page, B, C, and D all have sentences about the city shall refer objects greater than 35 feet to the ALUC or FAA. So I'm just wondering how, like, how does that referral work?
So this is, we are actually, as part of our submittal requirements, going to require that applicants submit their FAA and ALUC consistency determination to the city.
Yes.
And this codifies basically the Airport Land Use Commission for our area has a comprehensive land use plan. And this information comes from that document about what the ALUC is looking for consistency. So what we're trying to establish here is that facilities will have to go and obtain their FAA certification first if they're going to require it. If they're not, then the FAA can just say, for example, that's required for all structures over a certain height in the city of Monterey.
Right, right.
That if you're building a certain height in the city of Monterey, because we have approach zones, you have to get a height certification document from the FAA that you're not violating the approach zones.
Great.
And
Okay.
those
So
are the types of things.
I guess my question is whether that refer word in B, C, and D is, that's clear to you, what an applicant is supposed to do with that refer. Just the word refer.
I'll put it down in my notes and I'll go back and look.
Okay.
And
It wasn't clear to me, so that's why I'm asking.
I'll look at that.
Then on packet page 29 at the top.
Just write that down, Terry.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so packet page 29 at the top on the left, under C. And this is pretty straightforward. Applicant shall mail notice of the application to all persons entitled to notice. So I guess to the applicant, the city will help them, give them a list or something, or I'm just curious if that's been discussed, how that process works.
So there's two ways that it's been administratively working. The applicant can contact us before they're submitting their application, and we'll prepare a GIS map with the notice ring. That 38159 refers to the rings for use permits. And we can print out a list of all the property owners within a certain distance of that property.
Okay, good.
Alternatively, some of them are choosing to go to title companies independently and having that, they can equally do it. They have access to county tax assessor records.
Okay, good. So then page 31, the top section, it's I, or just, it's sort of a Roman 1, I guess, or something. In the bottom of that paragraph, I don't know, that's whole last sentence of that first I. If existing or proposed structures or facilities are or will be non-compliant in any respect, the application shall identify what applicant will do to ensure the structure and existing and proposed facilities are compliant. So it seems like there's some, I don't know, it just seems like there's, you might rethink that sentence because it seems like it's kind of going two directions at once about compliance.
Okay.
Then in the bottom of page 31, D, So the documentation shall be supported by sworn statements attesting that the wireless communications facility installed will comply with acceptable law. So that, I guess the applicant would know these sworn statements by whom, you know, who's, I mean, right below that, they're requiring structural engineers to provide reports, but that those sworn statements in D, or is that clear to you? Who is providing? You know, it's the documentation is supported by sworn statements, but it might, there could be some clarification there about who is actually
Swearing.
who's swearing. Yeah, good. Then, now I'm getting really nitpicky. On page 33, right, sort of towards the top under U,
Mhm.
the third line is federal law such that a permit must issue. Is that grammar okay there?
Must issue.
Not a permit must be issued, but a permit, maybe that's a legal term.
It must issue.
We can look at it.
Okay, it seemed a little bit ungrammatical.
Okay,
Um,
this is helpful. I mean,
yeah,
this-
you know, just,
we all know that.
So then you go to page 40, packet page 40, under the 2 eyes size.
I'm sorry, so 42 eyes under what?
Towards the bottom of the sheet,
Okay,
size.
oh, so G and then. look-
Yeah, I'm sorry, G,
Mhm.
whatever that double I is. So the 50-inch maximum height, is that's just the height of a piece of equipment. That isn't the height off the ground. Is that right?
I read that. The equipment excluding the meter and disconnect and including the cabinet should be no larger than 16 cubic feet and no higher than 50
Inches.
inches.
Off the ground.
Okay, so we will clarify if that's off the ground. I think it is.
It might just be a maximum dimension of the box itself, wherever it sits. I don't know. Then on page 42, L, right in the middle of the sheet. Is there any, I'm wondering if there's any relationship between the ADA rules on sidewalk widths and this discussion of, you know, exterior mounted equipment? Like, obviously, you don't want somebody to put a box on a pole that reduces the sidewalk to less than ADA requirements.
Well, and the boxes are typically higher because they don't want people hitting their heads.
Yeah,
running
yeah.
into them as well. So
Ooh, that would be-
So that you don't, but sometimes they have like things down on the, at
they have
grade.
freestanding boxes I've seen separate that we had one application I remember with Verizon where they had a freestanding piece of equipment off the sidewalk and they were trenching to the pole. And
Right.
then that was, and then they were trying to shield that with landscaping.
Well, I guess the, you know, preserving ADA width on a sidewalk is so basic, probably don't even need to say anything.
Yeah, so they do have to comply with those laws.
Yeah.
And we don't have to recodify those laws.
Yeah, you're
To
right.
compel that compliance, and that is a part of the review and check process.
So then page 43, 8A, the last line. It's just another sort of a semantic question, the attractive nuisances.
Yep.
Visual blight or attractive nuisances. Is that, I'm just wondering if attractive is the right word there.
So legal
It's
eagle
a
thing.
legal,
Yeah.
yeah, a term of art.
Oh, it is,
It
okay.
is, yeah.
Okay,
So-
okay. At the bottom of 43, that whole 9A, it seems a little bit like it could use some more crafting.
How do you note that?
It says preferences, city-owned or controlled parcels. It's just, the whole thing is sort of a bunch of words that I just think it could use some better writing, especially the top line.
Well, and also since it's repeated in B, C, D, A, B, C, they all start with the same thing. So
Yeah.
A, B, C, D.
So we can look at rewording that. I mean, we did spend quite a time with that. This is an important concept. It's the placement preferences
Right.
that we try to clarify what the city's intent is with preference of the placement.
Right.
But we can always look at language and see if there's any cleanup.
Yes, I think I understand it. Preferences, city-owned or controlled.
And then it's
Okay, well,
industrial and then it's commercial.
it just didn't hit me as, great writing. So then I'm just about done. I'm sorry to be so tedious. So then on page 51, O2, on the very bottom, it talks about providing mock-ups as must be necessary. And it's really this last question I have is that then on page 53, there's also a reference to mock-ups and definitions. And I thought you were getting rid of mock-ups, so you're still keeping it there in case it's requested or something?
This was for pre-approval of designs. So if there is an opportunity in our ordinance for a company to come in and submit for pre-approval of a specific design type
Right.
and not do it necessarily on a site-by-site basis. And for that, we were looking at mock-ups might be necessary to understand the design, but not on the pole or anything like that. So the mock-ups I've been referring to have been, is what our current ordinance requires and what we were looking at this ordinance continuing to require is mock-up on sites and on, and it's on 6-story buildings, it's on top of hotels, it's on top of utility poles. We cannot require those types of mock-ups without requiring full structural engineering and installation because they're up so high, they can fall and we don't want them to hurt anybody.
No, I think you made that point, and that's totally
And you're wondering why here, because this was under pre-approval of design.
right. So there's still a mock-up sort of a thing that can happen, but certainly not on-site mock-ups. I mean, and Mr. Reed might be talking about that more about whether that whole mock-up idea was just a misnomer that you were thinking that we were expecting, mock-ups adhered to the site of structures rather than little models of the thing that would be,
Careful
to
now,
demonstrate.
that was my idea.
Oh, the little mock-up models.
The mock-up that they brought to the meeting that night.
Right.
The neighborhood brought in, that was well done.
I know.
It was a little sloppy, but it was well done. It gave us the idea how big that stuff was.
Right. Okay, so that's all I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Terry. Excellent questions. Who would like to go next? All right, Mike.
Packet page 17, there's a phrase in here that says may not approve. What does that mean? And it's repeated several more times. On here, packet page 38, it's repeated again. But it's may not approve is if it's not on a Wednesday with an R in it, something like that. May not approve.
You're on page 17? I'm sorry.
Packet page 17.
Mhm.
I don't know exactly where in this. I
Okay,
have to
give me a
have a
second.
page over to it.
Meaning like staff report?
I'm rolling to it. Yeah. Eventually I'll get there.
I do see a hand raised, so I just want to take this moment to announce that we will do public comment when the chair announces that it's time. That would be after commissioner questions. Thank you.
Okay. On page 17, it's below facade mounted equipment. Second sentence, the city may not approve any pop-out screen boxes. And then later down, it says the city may not approve any exposed facade mounted antennas. Now, are we talking may, might,
Or will not.
or not, or whatever? But I think may not approve could be construed a lot of different ways. And I have, sort of a general question for the letters that we got. The Andrew Campanelli Esquire and the Albreton for Verizon, they're at odds almost from beginning to end. How do we resolve that? That's going to be a little tough because these are supposedly experts in what they do.
So I think you need to remember the city also has very qualified legal staff
I know.
and that specializes in telecommunications law. So, and both of them are online with us this afternoon. And so they help us wade through. We expect a tension between the providers and the public. And, there's just different points of view. If you look just at the issue of, you go through every single point, one group says to do it one way and one says to do it the other way. And we're going to have to make
And
our
one of them's wrong.
independent judgment on what's legal and what's appropriate.
Ain't gonna be easy. Oh, and one last thing. We heard from Nina Beatty again, and we asked at the last meeting for some clarity on what we can do to help her out. So I don't know where that's going, but I think we should move forward with a resolve, some kind of resolution.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure I do either.
If in fact that she's being harmed by an ADA difficulty, why aren't we fixing the ADA difficulty?
In participating in this meeting or in having
Any-
Wi-Fi
yeah,
generally in the
Any of
city?
the 100 things that she's done.
Okay, I think her complaints have been addressed through a separate board and separate disabled access proceedings. And so as far as I know, her concerns have been responded to and addressed by the city. It would be outside the purview of this board for further consideration.
It's not my purview, certainly, but if you keep hearing it, you say, well, maybe there's a way to help.
Right, we've responded multiple times to all the complaints as required by law.
Okay, fine.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. Let's move to the commissioners who are on Zoom. Want to start? Mike Brassfield? I can see you leaning forward there.
Mute.
You're muted.
Commissioner Brassfield, you're muted. Can you please unmute for us?
Okay. Like Terry, I made a list of some of the things and he's covered a substantial number of them. It'll save me some time. Appreciate it. My 8th grade English teacher, Mrs. Mitchell, told me you should never start with the abbreviations before you spell out what it means in a text. And I found on page 4 of the attachment 2, because I don't have the packet pages on my computer. But on page 4, we need to spell out and actually reverse the next paragraph because it says ALVC and then goes down to say Monterey ALVC. So that, and it also starts with an FAA. without an explanation of what it is. We know what it is. On page 9 of that packet, camouflage. And then later on, it talks about faux. Well, I will tell you that since I started sitting on these hearings a couple of years ago on this topic, I pay close attention to almost anything that has cell towers attached to it. And I look driving around the state of California, I see these purple or blue trees, and they're camouflage cell towers where the sun has changed the color. So I think that we might want to cover something to fix that problem as it comes down. On page 11, it talks about engineers. And then it talks about licensed or registered, and then it goes in at various places throughout the text, also refers. I think it should be an appropriate engineer because they're different kinds of engineers do different types of things. We need to answer the question, is it licensed or registered? It should be, which is it? And then, like I said, in my mind, it should be an appropriate whatever type of engineer, because we're talking about at least two different types of, or three types of different engineers in this text. And I would hate to have somebody that knows about colors writing about RF just because he's a licensed engineer. And please, that don't mean that as a slant to engineers. That's just appropriate. All equipment on page 12 is all equipment should be described by name and model. I've been told that frequently from the application process to the implementation process, the equipment changes. And if you list a piece of equipment and it has a make and model on it, and then a different piece of equipment shows up, I think we would want to know if that was taken into consideration for any decision on this particular site. So if you could, I'm sure Kim is making notes of that. It talks about service coverage maps. And I'm not so much interested in the general service coverage maps as I am on the periphery of the city of Monterey. Because if a certain area shows that it needs to be increased in service capability, if that service capability is another political entity, i.e. the airport, and so forth, or even the fairgrounds, because those are state and federal control, then might be that the cell tower could be put into those entities versus the city of Monterey. Cut down some of our workload because of, as we learned by the postgraduate school, we have no control over it. So if we could pay attention to that, some alternative to just having a cell tower be put in the city of Monterey when it does no coverage on these maps in the city of Monterey, that it's an adjoining agency. I don't know if we have control over that or not. I think Mike covered the denial of application, but one issue I just would suggest, because in the text it uses unless, and that is talking about whether or not to deny it. That's a minefield when you start looking at unless. And I don't think that we need to do it. It's either a denial or not. Make additions to the information contingent to the approval while it's denied, not that, oh, it's just a little thing.
Could you let us know what page you're on? I'm sorry, I'm not following this.
I'm sorry, page 15 of the
Item page or packet page?
attachment two. Attachment two, that's the draft where all the changes are. I always read those because you can read the intent of various writers. But anyways, I just suggest that it's either approved or it's not. If they forgot something, and it might be a small thing, but I will tell you, I've dealt with people with applications a lot in the past, and they will promise you something that never comes. So if it's a minor thing, then get it. Aside from that, it's denied contingent to. And then well, I've already covered that, but on page 24, we're talking about size. I just think it needs to start out with the smallest size possible, because if you look at the sites that we've approved in the city, some of them are substantial size. And it talks about, and I read once even in the comments, the 3 square feet or 28 square feet. When you start talking about 15 inches wide to 15 inches deep, technology is upon us, and this stuff should be getting smaller. So we need to put that in there. On page 32, it talks about utter, O-T-E-R. I think that means other. We're not talking about livestock here.
Is everyone else following the page numbers? I'm sorry, I'm having a really hard time tracking.
32 of attachment 2.
I think that was changed, Mike, in the subsequent amendment to attachment 2.
I didn't catch it when I read the other document.
Up with Kim later, but I'm
I'm
having a
not
hard
following.
time.
Yeah, no, I didn't find it either.
And I haven't pretty much the entire time.
Well,
So
there's item
I just don't want to
page,
miss important comments. So,
there's item page, and then there's packet page.
right, but the item page that he's
I
referencing
don't know
isn't
which
actually
it-
aligning
which
with
it
the
is.
statements made.
It's on page 47, Christie, of the amended 2. The word was O-T-E-R, and they changed it to O-T-H-E-R. It was on page 38 of the first attachment 2. Then the amended attachment 2, it went to page 47, and they caught the typo.
Okay, the last, actually, I got one additional. This is not mentioned in the text, but at all these hearings that we've had experts come in and applicants come in, one of the issue frequently is that we ask a question of these experts and they say, I don't know. And nobody can explain what we're trying to gain the information on these packets. And I know in my mind that sometimes a company may not send the most powerful person into those meetings, and they expect that we're going to have some of these I don't knows, but this is an evolving and very complicated topic. And it's really frustrating when the experts come in and say, I don't know. It's not going to get easier on us. It's not at all. It's going to be continuing to be this kind of process. I appreciated when I watched the presentation that I have also heard around the state of California that other people are having a problem with maps. They never see maps because the maps can be generated off of a computer, and that you needed to have the backup data. So I appreciated that comment. And I think that's basically we can only deal with aesthetics. That's basically what they're telling us. But that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Anson, you want to say something?
No, I will reserve my comments till the next meeting. Just want to hear and listen. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, and I'll make comments, but not any questions.
All right, Dan?
I had a couple questions that Terry covered earlier, so I'm good to go.
Okay, Steve?
Yeah, I have a few. On the first attachment 2, I read 119 shall and 39 musts. Courts often differentiate, saying words have meaning, and so shall and must have different meanings. And they have said some of them had shall as directory when used with must, which is mandatory. To avoid any kind of problem, do we want to add in the definition section, shall means must and must means shall? It sounds silly, but then again, we're dealing with decisions that may not always make sense.
If I
In
could,
addition, I found 18 shoulds and 3 encouraged. And of course, that means it's not enforceable. And if it's not enforceable, why is it in the ordinance? On page 29, subparagraph D as in David, it needs a title. Look for the parallel construction in the other subparagraphs, and they all have titles, except for subparagraph D. Also on page 29, subparagraph F is not a sentence. All the others are. And page 35, subparagraph D as in David, it looks like the word should in the title may be surplusage. I don't know if it even should be there. No pun intended. Page 39, paragraph C, quote, can be considered. And my question is by whom and what are the guidelines? The other 2 questions I have are in relation, not so much to the report, but as to the letters submitted by the public. To what extent is the coverage gap concerned? I mean, how does that determine, or does it have any influence at all upon someone's right to place polls? And then the last one, fortunately, is that private setbacks such as the Calabasas ordinance, how does that interplay with the public's right of way or the public right of way usage and right, if any, by the providers, cell providers to use? What is the interaction between the two, if any? That's all I have, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And I noticed that both Ms. Davi and Kim are taking notes of those comments and questions of yours. I have a question, and I'll phrase my comment in the form of a question. My question on page 10 of the proposed ordinance, and again, I don't have the packet page, so this is the proposed draft ordinance. And page 10, item Q, radio frequency compliance report. Are we saying here that the FCC RF compliance is the base standard that everyone has to meet? That these providers have to meet? That that's the base standard?
It is the standard.
Okay.
They
All
can't
right.
exceed it.
I continue to be troubled by something that we just mentioned in the meeting. In watching the video that was recommended, which was illuminating, I thought, from the perspective of somebody who lives in a residential neighborhood and who has children and grandchildren. He repeatedly said, well, what happens when you wake up one morning and there's a wireless box outside the bedroom of a 5-year-old?
Yeah.
He must have said that 10 times during the video. And so here we sit with a school, a high school in the middle of a residential neighborhood, and a junior high and an elementary school also, at least they are in my neighborhood, and they seem to be in a protected bubble where if they wanted to raise money and put up a wireless tower in the middle of the football field, they could do it and we wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Do I have that right?
Yep.
If it's for classroom facilities, so we'd have to see what the application was, what the use of the tower was for. If they link it to classroom facilities, then and they vote to override city zoning regulations, then the answer to your question is yes.
Yeah.
If it's not related to classroom facilities, then the answer is no.
Okay. So a higher authority or a different authority would have to rule on that, not just the city or the city attorney.
I believe it'd be the state architect. Is that right, Tim? State architect?
Well, the state architect governs development on school district properties.
Okay.
But obviously they have their own elected governing board that makes their decisions on their property as well. I mean, as
Uh-huh.
far as projects and capital improvement projects, and then they're reviewed by the state architect for consistency with guidelines. We're not the building department for schools or any facilities like that.
Okay.
That's an interesting distinction, the classroom thing. I mean, I guess the football field lights are visible from the classroom, therefore they're exempt.
Therefore, that's okay.
It's actually, they found, I hope I don't misstate the case, but that there's teaching and instruction that does happen on the fields.
Oh, okay.
So it's classroom related facility.
Okay.
Right.
All right, then, we've asked questions of the city staff, and I believe that revisions will be made and reported back to the commission and also to the public. At this point, I don't think, do we need a break? It's, we're hoping to finish by 6:30. We want to limit public comment to 3 minutes apiece. We want to hear from everybody. And at this point, I would start with the people who are present in the council chamber, and then go to the people who are phoning in. All good to continue right away? Okay. All right, let's open public comment, and we'll begin now with those members who are present in the council chamber. And you don't have to, but it would be very good for the record if you would tell us if you were on the subcommittee. That would be very helpful to, I think, our decisions. Why don't you begin? And introduce yourself if you wouldn't mind.
Susan.
Good afternoon. My name is Susan Nine. I am a member, or was a member of the wireless subcommittee. I've decided in listening to comments that I'll abandon my planned comments and mail them to the planning commission or save them to your next meeting. I'd rather respond to comments that have been made so far at the hearing. Quickly, Ms. Cole stated that telecoms have a legal right to access the public right-of-ways. That's not quite accurate. That is a state law. It's been determined to be a limited right. The law actually states it must be done in such a manner that it does not incommode the public, which the state Supreme Court, it's a state law, has determined that that includes aesthetic and other considerations. And the law specifically states that municipalities retain the grant of the ability to make time, place, and manner decisions about where those facilities will go in the rights of way. This was also mentioned and talked about in the Portland case, which vacated the FCC ruling regarding aesthetics, which is a very important thing to study. Because the FCC was attempting to regulate wireless equipment in the same manner as a transformer on a pole, and that argument did not carry in the Ninth Circuit Portland case, which Mr. Von Eaton actually was, I think, lead counsel in. I was quite concerned by the number of changes because we were given certain assurances by the city council when we volunteered for this, what turned out to be extremely lengthy process, that our work would be what goes forward. And I understand many of the changes that were made. I do want to point out that staff and director was present at every meeting, and we had the benefit of their input and advice. It was sage, it was good. We took it. So a lot of this is after the fact administrative changes, which the city council said would not happen. But I think we just need to focus on particular items, not rewriting the whole thing. But I think MVNA sent specific examples we'd like to see reinstated. Regarding notice of temporary cell towers, that was in the subcommittee's draft. It was important because that would, can be quite large and quite high, and it would state the duration and purpose for them. And it should have setback requirements. Also, the wind test was very important to Mr. Olson, bless his heart, who had a stroke during one of our meetings and has subsequently passed. And I can't imagine why that requirement was removed by the staff, but it was extremely important for safety and other reasons. Co-location, some of the comments by Verizon amazed me because co-location is extremely important. You can take a small cell application and get it passed in 60 days, job clock, and then come back with co-location, adding bulk antenna height, which actually changes it from a small cell into a new cell tower, and your stealth designs, your camouflage designs can be completely undone through a co-location of a 6409 facility. And so I think there does need to be very good administrative and planning commission review of those applications. I really appreciate Mr. Reed's recognition that we do need to have some form of mock-ups, even if it's having them bring in scale models of so we can see these in person. I don't think the burden belongs on the public to have to do that, to give the planning commission and the public an idea of what these will actually look like. The photographs are extremely misleading and photoshopped, and they just don't. And you know that because the city council was overwhelmingly disappointed with what they actually got when they put the Foam Street cell tower on. They didn't think it was going to be that prominent or that big. The statement that the Telecommunications Act, the prohibition clause of the Telecommunications Act does not apply to small cells, it's the most ridiculous statement I've heard so far this evening. You can't rely on lawyers representing the applicant to define the law. That's why we're interested in Mr. Campanelli. He's objective. He's stating the law. He studies the law. That's his specialty. We'd like to have someone like that review to get the strongest language, because that's the term that the city council used when they appointed us. They wanted the strongest possible ordinance with the greatest protections and local control. I appreciated Mr. Milich's notice that we need to be consistent with the shoulds and shalls. The committee asked the staff to do a check on any shoulds and change them to shalls. And I think must and shall mean the same thing in legal terms, and just be consistent in their use would be great. And I guess I'm over 3 minutes, so thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment.
Madam Chair, point of order. I mean, we're going to have another. We're going to extend this to the probably the May 24th meeting. Really, if we're going to get through everything by 6:30, I mean, I would really highly recommend that if we announce the 3-minute limit, that we actually follow the 3-minute limit.
I'm sorry, I do apologize. We have another timer with a beeper that was supposed to interrupt at 3 minutes, and I did not set that with my screen timer. So I am sorry. I will do both of them going forward.
Me too.
Good evening. All cell wireless communication facilities emit EMF, electromagnetic radiation. The degree that's considered dangerous is now determined by FCC safety limits, and the applicants for wire facilities must be able to provide substantial proof that their proposed facilities will be in compliance. Problem is that these facilities don't yet exist, and models have to be created to predict these potential future impacts. Based on my experiences in reviewing numerous applications submitted to the City of Monterey in the past for wireless communication facilities, I found these applications to include numerous factual errors. I don't know what they were talking about earlier about peer reviews. The ones I saw never were peer reviewed. Misleading information and woefully lacking details and other information to substantiate their conclusions and statements that would be in compliance with the FCC limits. Therefore, it's my belief that proposed changes to the Wireless Committee ordinance must include a provision to require the applicant to provide verification of methods, the actual physical measurements of distance and structures, not Google map estimates, antennas and nearby building elevations, topography maps, and the radio antenna models with specifications, including both the horizontal and the vertical field radiation patterns. You have to have this information. I also recommend the ordinance have a requirement for an independent radio engineer to verify the work that's been submitted, just as any other building permit requires now. At present, residents are forced to address you, and in turn, you rely on your staff for recommendations, but they may also not possess the technical expertise as a radio engineer. In 2018, some of you were here, Extenet submitted 13 applications for a densified cellular network in Monterey. I was able to ask questions of their engineer, and I was told by that engineer that I should personally look up the radio manufacturer's specifications and verify his report. He refused to allow me access to his software he used, claiming it was proprietary. I did, as he advised, I researched the data. I determined that I was unable to verify his calculations due to critical mistakes on the application. The antenna models were wrong, and that he specified, for example, where there was a directional antenna, it was actually an omnidirectional antenna. The specifications would be all different. This critical error repeated on all 13 applications, and without correct model numbers, I could not verify any. Further, this pattern of error was repeated over and over again on the Planning Commission agenda report and the CTC technology and energy reports that accompanied it. Details matter in science, and we rely on our public officials to know how to verify what they're allowing to be built and operated in our neighborhoods and our place of business. Please consider these suggestions, changes that I've outlined to the wireless facility ordinance.
Thank you. Did you introduce yourself, or would you like to?
Yeah, I'm Ray Myers. I live in Monterey.
Thank you. Thank you, Ray.
My name is Gina Jett. I'm a resident of Monterey. Thank you for taking up the City Monterey Wireless Communication Ordinance draft as we all work to finalize the strongest, most up-to-date ordinance. We residents come before you to question and likely object to staff proposed changes to the draft ordinance because we now have more information about the legalities of cell towers in residential neighborhoods. Most of us residents believe that the draft ordinance is weak in comparison with ordinances other like-minded and sophisticated municipalities have adopted. Dedicated attorneys throughout the U.S. now represent residents as well as municipal governments in opposing neighborhood cell towers. Those of us speaking before you today are particularly influenced by the work of attorney Andrew Campanelli. You've heard his name mentioned several times. His overriding message is that indeed local governments can prevail should their ordinances come under legal fire if and only if they have ironclad ordinances. In YouTube videos and the one that Pat Vinza recommended to you, forwarded to you, Mr. Campanelli encourages us not to squander our local powers of control. Closer to home, for your information, you may or may not know this, residents of Carmel by the Sea recently hired Mr. Campanelli to review and critique their ordinance. These residents are paying Mr. Campanelli his flat fee of $8,500 for about 22 hours of work, resulting in recommendations to strengthen their ordinance. So my recommendation to Monterey commissioners and staff, if you haven't already done so, please view what we residents are viewing. Come to think of it, maybe Monterey should hire Mr. Campanelli to review our draft, then maybe we all would rest more peacefully. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Pat Benza, Monterey Vista. It always seems like the main question that has to be answered is there a gap in service? And if there isn't a gap, I may be simplifying, but it's like over and done, guys, you know. But in the way the ordinance reads, or looking back 5 years when we had to go through this, our neighborhood, the applicant came in with all kinds of fancy maps and of which didn't tell the truth until the city hired a company to do a drive-by testing. I didn't see in the new ordinance specifically that a drive-by testing is required. And I think if we put that in there, once again, it would be specific and we wouldn't have to be guessing as to if these computer generated maps are accurate or not. That this seems to be a better way to do it. In addition, the ordinance is what gives the city the power to deny applicants if it is written in detail. And this would be one more detail that I think is so important, not just saying propagation maps or some term that isn't specific to actually doing the drive-by. So I would appreciate that being considered to be added to the ordinance. Thank you.
Oh, Mrs. Venza, special thanks for sending along the video. Very helpful.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Lori Putnam. I was not on the subcommittee, but I do live in New Monterey, directly across the street from a cell tower. It was permitted, I believe in 2001, was one of the first, if not the first, wireless facilities permitted, I believe in Monterey. And at that time, there were not a lot of guidelines in place. And I think we've all learned a lot since then. One of the things I have learned is how hard you all work to do this work, to put the ordinances in place, to review applications, to set conditions on permits. And another thing I've learned from my own experience is that if there is no method of monitoring and enforcing the conditions on permits, then a lot of this work is not going to mean much. And what we've seen in our experience is that the tower was installed, the operator came back multiple times requesting modifications. We went through applications and meetings and reviews, and all kinds of conditions were put on permits. And then the applicant walked away and did not follow through in many cases. And I think that's a problem. And I think there are multiple places in the ordinance where you could build in a requirement that a site be monitored and that conditions be reviewed on a regular basis to make sure that they are still being met. And it's been 20 years now, and we have found that it's really up to the neighborhood to monitor the site and to report back to the city when things aren't happening the way they should. And that puts an undue burden on the residents, and it's not effective because we can't do that effectively. And so I think you need to look for ways to build in monitoring and enforcement in a way that does not put a burden on either the residents or the city, because the city is not staffed to be able to do that at every facility. So if there's a way to make it the applicant's responsibility financially to make sure that there's a way for that to happen, that would make a big difference in how all of this comes about and how much it affects the neighbors.
Thank you.
Hi there. My name is Daniel Dotterer. My family and I are residents of Monterey Vista. And our story, the story of our journey up to today started about 4.5 years ago. At that time, I had a different infant strapped to my chest, over there monkeying around. Back then, Verizon and Extenet had a plan to install 13 small cell facilities in our neighborhood. And our community came together to let these telecom companies know that we didn't want nor didn't need these antennas in our beautiful Monterey residential neighborhoods. My family and I are members of Monterey Vista Neighborhood Association, and we support all the recommendations made by Monterey Vista Neighborhood Association's 9-page public comment. A strong ordinance starts with retaining as much local control as possible and input from the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Friend too.
Well, good evening. I'm Hans Janisch, resident as well as member of the MVNA board. I want to recall the evening many years ago when that application for 13 cell towers came in, and we had this room packed with residents, every single one opposing the cell towers. And that came about because every single telephone pole in the city was well marked with what needed to be done. And I just, that highlights how crucial it is, I think, to make the public aware of what is going on, to make them aware ahead of time, give them plenty of comment time. And I think it is important to reconsider the idea of no mock-ups, maybe not mock-ups on top of the poles, but to have a mock-up somewhere where people can go and see it, and be it in front of City Hall, be it in Via Prizo Park, somewhere where people can go see. But I think the mock-ups or in here at a public meeting, I think those are important for people, and as well as marking every pole where things will be added. I think this is especially true when not only the first when the first antennas go up, but when every antenna goes up, because it does multiply, and all of a sudden a relatively small pole with relatively little equipment all of a sudden balloons when not just Verizon, but every other cell company comes up. So I think it is really important to inform the public and keep that somewhere in where they even maybe as they submit, they have to have every pole marked and clearly labeled, and let it be the company, the submitters themselves that have to do that, to put out clearly drawn signs mounted on every single pole that they want to do. The other thing I would love to hear is more comments about the allowability of setbacks, like Calabas has done. And I don't know what the legal thing is, but I would love to see some research done on setbacks and what's allowed and not allowed to do. I think a lot of neighbors are concerned about what happens on schools. I know there were setbacks on schools, and people definitely do not want the new light poles at the high school to be littered with cell phone antennas that are really meant to go out to the public, not just to school
Here's a
students.
thought.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good comment.
There's the thought. Anybody else from the council chamber? All right, Jennifer, why don't you announce how people can call in? How many do you think you have there?
We have 7 attendees currently, and I see 3 hands raised.
Okay.
Before I call on any of them, I do want to announce for our viewers at home who have not joined yet, members of the public are encouraged to join our meetings via Zoom Gov, a secure service that connects you live with no lag time. To join the Zoom meeting from a computer or phone, use the link or phone numbers on the agenda posted at isearchmonterey.org. To join by telephone, dial 833-568-8864, toll free. Once again, the phone number to join is 833-568-8864. That is a toll-free number. Then enter the webinar ID 161-990-8039. Once again, this meeting's webinar ID is 161-990-8039. To provide public comment via Zoom, please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of the screen. To provide comments by phone, dial *9 to raise your hand, then *6 to unmute when called upon. Public commenters will be announced using their last 3 phone number digits or the name typed into Zoom. Lastly, just a reminder that we do still have a 3-minute timer. First, I will ask Jean Rash. to unmute and provide comment.
Thank you. I'm Jean Rash. I live in Monterey Vista. I've followed these issues for years, and here we are again. I appreciate that advance notice of the agenda was shared. Thank you, Kim Cole, for that. I appreciate all the tremendous comments of the Planning Commission and appreciate your leadership, and we're really going to need you on this one. I hope we will take the time to continue this thoughtful conversation and consideration of the public's and the residents' comments. I, along with, as Mr. Dawson commented, am very concerned about the discrepancy between what the neighborhood wants and what Verizon's comments were. This is deeply concerning, and we need perhaps different legal counsel to get us through this. With all respects to Mr. Van Etten, we still are feeling that the neighborhood is less represented than we want. We want the most restrictive and constraining ordinances as possible to protect the neighborhoods and the families in the neighborhoods, and to enforce the time, place, and manner restrictions, including aesthetics. There were many administrative changes to the original documents that concern the public, and I encourage continued discussion on utilizing Andrew Capinelli and his group, and we need to really work on making that a public discussion, perhaps with its own study group. In particular, we need to keep the mock-ups, and Susan Nine is correct. That should not fall on the public to defend that. We need mock-ups. I've heard at least one of the commissioners say that had there been a mock-up on Wave Street, he would not have supported that installation. I personally went in before that was installed to the restaurant across the street, the Montrose, I think it was, and asked them, did they even know that this was going up? And they said, no, they didn't know. I admit I don't know who I talked to, but I myself, even following it, was shocked with the width and the breadth of that tower. We need the 1,000 feet setbacks. We need notice on the temporary permits, and we need scientific documentation, like Ray Myers was saying, that the capacity gaps are proven, documented, shared, and scientifically correct, because that's where we nailed them exigent at the last round of this. They had data that was incorrect. So please help us continue all this great work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean.
Good timing.
Next on the list, we have the last three phone number digits, 902.
This is Nina Beatty. I want to echo the comments that many have said. I also want to add that notification for all Monterey residents, including renters, who are a majority of residents, as well as business owners, not just property owners, is essential. We don't live in the 1700s anymore, but staff has resisted this repeated request for notification for everyone. That's the right, that should be the right of all residents to get the information. And there needs to be a larger notification zone, 500 feet to 1,000 feet. In other areas, there is a larger notification zone. I encourage the commission to research the laws themselves. These are, an ordinary person can find these laws and read them. There's been my experience that there's been a cherry picking of the laws, taking out sections that favor the applicant and leaving sections in the law without discussing them that are create a more objective whole picture of what's going on. The law is the law and it's cohesive, and we need legal representation that's going to present the whole law. The FAA issue is not just about height. It used to be about height. Now it's about 5G frequencies, as many people have read, no doubt, in the media. The interference with radar altimeters from the 5G frequencies is a very real safety problem. And the airport review committee may not even be functioning on that basis, but that interference is of very important issue that needs to be addressed. I'd like to echo Susan Nine's comments on the statement about the right to install in the prow. No, it is subject to Public Utilities Code 7901 incommode clause. And again, the California Supreme Court was very clear on that. An ordinary person such as myself can find that. I'm concerned about the comment, where do we want to see them first? Is this a takeover that goes block by block? Or are these rules? Is this going to be everywhere eventually? Is that how staff sees it? I need to know that. There is also the issue about, quote, recodifying the laws. When a person, an applicant or a member of the public looks at the ordinance, they want to see everything there that they need to know about laws that impact wireless installations. And having all laws mentioned, including ADA, including fair housing, including California Building Code, all those need to be referenced in the wireless ordinance. Regarding mock-ups, the park lane was easy. Simply hang banners over the side of the building. There's no construction, there's no nothing. It's safe, nothing's going to fall on anyone. That would have been a simple solution. And generic poles can be erected in city property that telecoms then mount equipment on so someone can go see. This is being made much more difficult than it needs to be. I disagree with any administrative decisions or any administrative discretion, at the discretion of the directors, one quote. And also designees, Rincon consultants, I've enumerated their lengthy errors and misrepresentations that lead me to question their qualifications. Eliminate Mason, I still have 19 seconds according to my clock that's showing on my TV. FCC, by the way, is a guideline, it's not a standard. And not squandering local powers of control is really, really critical. I just want to end with, this is not the committee's draft. This is a staff work product. They were told, I was at those meetings, you're going to write this, not the staff. The staff will be available if you need them. Your draft will go to the Planning Commission, and that's been absolutely false. We need to bring this back to the community's work product, because that was a strong ordinance draft to protect the public.
Thank you.
I believe that was everyone. We did have a hand raised earlier that went down. So if that person would like to speak, oh, okay. Marcelo Cosentino, I'm giving you the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm Marcelo Cosentino. I live in the Monterey Vista neighborhood with my wife, longtime resident. I just want to state for the record that we are very opposed to having these small cell towers in our neighborhood, as we were back when Extenet filed for those 13 towers. You know, it was a surprise to me to see our house in Extenet's presentation. But what they didn't show is, if you would turn the camera around 180, the beautiful scenic vistas that Monterey and the city has to offer, and to be littered with these types of facilities really is really horrible for our neighborhood. And not only that, my wife is an electrical engineer. She's very well aware of the types of dangers that these small cell towers have on not just humans, but also the native the natural species that occur within our forest areas, the birds and all the smaller animals. So I want to make sure that for the record that we are very highly opposed to any type of cell tower within our neighborhood, and also that we appreciate all the hard work you're doing. In addition, one thing that I noticed of the presentation was that there would be a waiver for any type of CEQA, and I want to go on record saying that any and all projects, certainly, especially those that affect views, noise ordinances, or any type of environmental type of requirements, should undergo, and especially these types of projects should undergo the CEQA process, and there should not be any waiver on any types of these processes, and each one of these should be taken account individually and considered as individual projects. Thank you very much for your time. And again, for the record, my wife and I both are opposed to small cell towers within the Monterey Vista neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that it, Jennifer?
That was the last hand raised.
Okay.
If anybody else would like to raise your hand, just a reminder, there is a raise your hand button at the bottom of the screen if you're participating via Zoom. And we do not have any phone callers at the moment.
All right. Then we'll close public comment. And I wonder if it would be appropriate for each of the commissioners to just give a brief comment about what's happened today, because I think, as Kim said, we'll continue this to another meeting where the comments that were received will be looked at and probably many of them put into a new draft ordinance. Is that correct, Kim?
We will definitely review all the comments received and make a recommendation to you at the next meeting if there's any changes.
Okay. All right.
And it's at the pleasure of the commission, but I did want to just make sure everyone knows that we do have Mr. Van Eaton available by Zoom and also Gail Karish available by Zoom. They're both ready, willing, and able to try to help you answer any questions that you may have. They are a law firm with significant expertise in this area. They were involved in all the litigation before challenging the FCC, going all the way up to requesting the the U.S. Supreme Court for review. So they're considered experts in this field of law. And I will also state that the city of Monterey was joined as a party to that challenge to try to do whatever we can to preserve local control where legally feasible. So if you wish to take advantage of their knowledge today, please feel free to ask them questions. And if they're able to answer them, I'm sure they will.
Good.
Hands are up.
All right. Let's just do some brief commissioner comments. I know I have two. So Mike, you want to start?
I have sort of a broad question for our legal friends. It's been what, a year and a half since we disbanded the subcommittee, and I'm sure that a lot has happened in the small cell world since then. So could you just give us a 1 minute go round of the trouble that we're in here because we haven't been watching for 2 years?
So the two biggest changes was, while we won on the aesthetics issue before the Ninth Circuit, we weren't able to convince the Supreme Court or the Ninth Circuit to change the FCC's decision, which basically says significant gap and least intrusive alternatives are not the test now for whether someone is entitled to place a cell tower at a location, even if it doesn't comply with local zoning requirements. So as we were going through the document, we tried to make sure that we did not allow companies off the hook, but we did not adopt a standard that's now dead and that would open you up to challenges. The other thing the FCC did was change a number of provisions related to concealment versus stealth. And that may not make a lot of sense in a common usage, but it's significant in the way the FCC adopted the rule, because they basically said, even if you adopt a concealment condition, an operator may be able to simply ignore it unless you set forth clear conditions in any approval that make it obvious what the provider has to meet over time. And for stealth facilities, which the operator has less authority to modify, you make it very clear what each of the elements of stealth are. So some of the modifications you see are based on FCC redefinitions of terms that occurred in 2021 and that are being challenged now. So those things do affect how you write your ordinances in order to make them the strongest possible ordinance. Gail, did you have anything to add?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for having me. My name is Gail Karish. The only thing I would add is that in the last year and a half, I think what's happened is we've moved from implementation. A lot of cities have implemented standards, ordinance updates to litigation. And so we're getting more where sometimes the laws or the FCC orders are not entirely clear and subject to different interpretations. And you see that with the variety of comments that you get. We're starting now to see more cases and more clarity from the courts on some of these laws. We're still at the very early stages, obviously, because the orders are not that old, but that's one of the things I would say that I'm seeing is we're starting to see more litigation that is resolving some of the ambiguities in the law.
In response to a specific comment, Gail and I do not agree with most of the points in the All Britain letter from Verizon. I think it's fair to say we think that letter overstates the carrier's rights under law, under both California law and under federal law. So while we'll look at the changes, the question of competing points of view, the All Britain letter, we don't think reflects the current state of FCC of the law.
Good to know.
Yeah, man.
Good to know. Steve, do you have any questions for the two attorneys or a comment to make?
The comment I would make is that I think what's important to most of the residents is as much protection as we can possibly get for residential areas. And so I think that's where we need to concentrate on making it very clear in non-lawyer language as to what can be done and what can't be done. And I would hope that that would be furnished and maybe to our city attorney and the attorney-client privilege and passed down to us from that or not. It's up to you. But I do think we need to definitely address that. Thank you.
Mike Brassfield? Unmute yourself.
I was gratified to hear what Mr. Van Eaton had to say. I was not surprised. The federal government has put a whole lot of money into an infrastructure bill. And in the hearings that they had on those things, they talked about upgrading all the infrastructure in cell towers. And so I think that we're fighting a tidal wave probably. And I'm gratified to hear a lot of the suggestions that the staff has made. I don't know if I've read what Mr. Van Eaton just talked about in that draft, but I'm sure that the staff can catch up on that part. I really am glad to see that people come in and talk about this issue. As so many of the same faces, it's the same problem. And we've been trying to deal with it, but there's only so much kind of primarily staff time that so we can hold these meetings. So I just want to say I appreciate everybody's efforts. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Hanson?
Just a couple of comments. Mike, thanks for making that suggestion and having them point out, the attorneys point out changes in the law over the last year and a half, because that's great information to have, and we didn't have that before. So thanks, Mike. My position on mock-ups is still what I thought it was at the beginning, which is I still think we need mock-ups. I don't think we need mock-ups on a 3-story, 4-story, 5-story building, but I do think we need mock-ups to see what the size is and what the plan is for that, be it a small little something not 30 feet up in the air. But again, not like what was brought in, but like what was brought in at the meeting several years ago. So I think that's important. And I think it can be done in a way that makes sense, that is not economically unfeasible, that is not regressive to the applicant, but it's something that I think we should have, unless there's some case out there that says mock-ups don't work anymore and you can't do those. But again, I think it's important. I just to let all the other planning commissioners know, I did not review any of the video from that was suggested. My position as a planning commissioner is I need to listen to the advice of the attorneys that are being provided to me by the city, and I need to hear what they have to say. If there's citizens who want to hire an attorney and bring those in, have that attorney create dialogue with the city's attorneys. But again, I need to follow the city attorney and the attorneys that the city has provided to us to give us advice. And I'm going to the fullest extent I can, follow that. My comment on the draft ordinance itself, and I don't really have any comments on the draft ordinance itself, but I'll deal with those later. But I really highly recommend that a new red line be prepared and recirculated, one that is all one color. So create the new one, run a new red line, because there's not only different colors, there's highlights, there's all sorts of stuff. And if you're going to have that, then you need to have a code that says, this is what one person did, this is what another person did, this is why it was done. It was very difficult to read because I didn't know, and there was not the explanation that this was done over a period of time, and the Word document just created different colors. That just needs to be done in one fell swoop and with all one color and be provided to everybody. My final comment really is more of a I've got feeling on all this stuff. We have to do something. We have to make it, we have to protect the citizens. I find it, there's a lot of comments, which I'll bring later on, but relating to Wi-Fi versus data that one would bring out with a small cell tower, all that stuff, that it's very interesting. For example, my house, I don't need cell service at my house because I have a Wi-Fi that does 99% of what I do. So it's interesting, just some of the dichotomy of why would we want cell towers when everybody has Wi-Fi. So that's about it. But other than that, I think the comments are good. But again, I need to listen to, especially in this complicated field, the experts that are being provided to me.
Good enough. Thank you. Dan Fletcher?
Just an observation. First of all, there's just such a tremendous amount of work that's gone into this for the last couple of years, starting with the subcommittee all the way through to today. And I really appreciate everybody's efforts in trying to figure this out. We have a long ways to go yet, in my mind. And I'm not going to offer any thoughts firmly on the ordinance that we're looking at right now. But I do appreciate all the comments that we've gathered tonight, and it's been very helpful for me as I consider all these issues.
I agree with that. Gary?
Okay, I have a couple of questions for the attorneys and then a few comments. So I was looking online, and there were in 2018, there were several cities banded together to sue FCC over, it was net neutrality. It wasn't what we're talking about, but still there were, I don't know what that's called, class action or whatever, but there were, it was Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle. And I was wondering if there's been any, well, first of all, if there was any, final verdict or decision on where cities get together, if those particular suits had a result of some sort. But one of the things that really drives me crazy about this whole FCC deal is the shot clock thing. I think that's so unreasonable for jurisdictions to have these overly restrictive amounts of time to render decisions. It's just not realistic. And it's just asking for trouble, I think. So I was wondering if there's, either one of you have heard anything about any cities banding together to challenge the FCC on this stop clock issue.
So that issue was an issue we raised before the Ninth Circuit, and we lost on the issue. It was actually the second time we lost on the issue because the first set of shot clocks was adopted, I think, in about 2014. And we then argued that the shorter shot clocks that were adopted in 2018 were arbitrary and capricious, but we got nowhere with the courts on that. And worse, the California legislature passed a law that effectively says, if you miss those deadlines, the operator is going to have a chance to come in and force you to issue a permit or allow it to build. So in California, at least, so there's no prospect for challenging the FCC rules. You'd have to convince them that they're wrong and the rules should change administratively. And unfortunately, in California, you are, as Gail knows, because she's the California law expert, you're actually in a worse position than many cities, many communities around the country.
So when you talk about the we going to the Ninth Circuit, who is we?
Huge number of, it was this community, you are actually involved, but it was also the National League of Cities, several national associations representing communities, almost every major city in the United States, all of them challenged the FCC's rule.
I see. So in your opinion, that shot clock thing, we're stuck with it.
You're stuck with it unless you can convince the Biden administration and the Democratic FCC to change it. And I'm not sure that's on the table.
So my next question is
That's funny.
So there were several references to the Calabasas setbacks, and I don't know anything about that. Can you tell us what that means?
I'm going to let Gail address this, but I'll just say quickly, a lot of communities adopt setback requirements, but a setback requirement in particular communities can have the effect of leaving providers with nowhere to place a wireless facility. It depends sort of what sort of housing you have. So the Calabasas case says no residential unit. Well, I know from talking to Kim, you're dealing with rules that would expand where you can have residential units in the city of Monterey. So if you have 1,000-foot setback from any residential unit, you could actually end up leaving yourself with no place to put a wireless facility. And that would be the easiest case for a provider to win by drawing on a map and saying, look, Judge, they really aren't allowing it anywhere. Gail, did you? So you have to be cautious. It can be done, but it doesn't work for every community.
That's right. Just to give to explain a little more. So there's different terms get used sometimes, setbacks or spacing or just distance from certain uses. Those are particularly challenging to determine sort of the impact, like Joe was mentioning about whether that would leave any room for placement in an area or any poles available or things like that. Those are can be difficult to evaluate, and the impact is always needed to be evaluated in the particular city or the zone where that rule would be applied. The only thing I would also add is that when a carrier looks at the rules that you come up with for aesthetics and for placement and all of that, they will look at it on a cumulative basis. So what's the impact of all the rules? And we have an example of that analysis is in the public record. Verizon did in the city of Los Altos, that when several years ago when they were adopting an ordinance, or they did adopt an ordinance, and Verizon there argued that the cumulative impact of all of their different rules meant that 95% of the right of way or the residential areas were off limits, and they sued them and claimed that this would create an effective prohibition of service, that there was nowhere they could place their facility. So that's when you see an individual, you can find a community that adopted a rule for one or the other sort of, different sorts of aesthetic requirements. It's hard to kind of pick them and just say, well, if it worked there, it works here, because everything in real estate is location, and doing a full analysis of the cumulative impact of all the rules.
I think
Los Altos lose? Did Los Altos lose?
That they were sued by AT&T and Verizon. I think that case is still ongoing. I don't know if it's been settled, or if I think the last time I saw anything about it, I think it was in mediation.
Okay, thank you.
So what is Calabasas? I assume Calabasas jurisdiction passed an ordinance with setbacks. And what's the status of that?
That I don't know. We can check. I know the city of Calabasas has been involved in litigation in the past with the wireless industry related to RF emissions. But I'm not aware of the current status of this ordinance, or whether there have been any challenges to it or anything like that.
Okay, thank you. So just a few, thank you very much. So a few other comments. I'm definitely with Hansen on this idea of the applicants providing models of some sorts. I think maybe the term mock-up was throwing people off to think that it was an in situ thing blowing in the wind that's going to hurt people, but this, some way of a 3D actual model that would help the community understand what these facilities look like. And then finally, I assume that most applications would have to have a licensed surveyor provide a survey. And there seems to be some confusion about that, but that's just a submittal requirement, right?
Site survey?
Yes.
It's not a current submittal requirement. Most of our facilities to date have been on existing buildings. We have them provide site plans, but not a full license survey. We've had them, you recognize them on the Portola, on the Marriott, on office buildings in Ryan Ranch area. We have one existing tower. So those are the types of facilities that we've most recently been reviewing. As we look to the public right of way, if we want to add that as a submittal requirement, I guess I think I would look to see if they're changing the existing pole at all. If they're not, and they're putting it on top of an existing pole, I don't know what the purpose of the survey would be if there's no site changes around it and it's in the air. So I'll just put that out there.
Okay. Yeah, I see your point. That if if a pole was going on a steep location and your house was nearby and you wanted to assess the impact, I could see there would be some logic for that, but it's hard to figure out how that would fit into the ordinance. So I know like in the general requirement for surveys, if you come within 3 feet of a setback line on a regular application, you have to provide a survey. So is there some way we could give staff the authority to require surveys when it makes sense to them?
So let me think about it and we'll
Okay.
try to see if we can come up with a submittal requirement that makes sense. Because the submittal requirements are codified in this ordinance. But there is discretion from the community development director about when and to require it. And there's just a lot of common sense things as you're looking at applications.
I remember the 13 famous, tower applications we had. There was a lot of those that needed survey information because there was equipment in the bushes and, sidewalks. And so there's some of them that obviously you're going to need surveys.
I think we've learned a lot since the 13 applications,
Yeah.
but not saying we're perfect, but just saying things have evolved quite a bit in 4 years.
If Verizon hadn't pulled 12 of those applications, we'd still be there.
Okay, that's all I
I
have.
think everyone remembers that meeting like it was yesterday.
Yes, it was.
Like it was yesterday.
I chaired the meeting. I remember it. Yes. Mike Dawson was next to me when we were looking at a riot.
A real riot. I have 3 comments. One is, in the 18 letters that were submitted, many of them had overarching thoughts, and then some of them had very specific recommendations. And because the specific recommendations are so simple, I really think that you may want to pay attention to those and see if they're feasible or not, because the last 4 letters that were submitted all, quoted setbacks and heights and different improvements to a large body of work, which I think might be taken into consideration. The second thing I wanted to say is, in the absence of a bona fide mock-up, why couldn't we just say, fine, you give us the address of an installation that more or less duplicates what you're proposing here, and we will give that address to our public and they can go look at it and see what's going to be built. Because if you pointed to the Marriott or the Portola or the one that's out there on Garden Road that's going to be, and they drove out, a person drove out to take a look at it, they could see it in the flesh. So I think that the carrier should be able to provide an address of a similar installation in lieu of a mock-up where feasible. The other thing that occurs to me, and this may be a little too far future oriented, but I agree with everybody that the ordinance should be as tight can be to protect the neighborhoods, and especially, honestly, elementary schools and places where small children are going to be exposed to all the RFs. Within the not too distant future, and it's happening today, these cell towers are going to be replaced by satellite coverage. Satellites that aren't going to be installed in the ground. They're going to be out there. And they're being installed today for commercial and defense purposes. They'll be here tomorrow, and that will make these cell towers, I think, a moot point.
It'll be 6G.
What?
6G.
The 6th generation, the twilight zone, I
Yeah,
just
right.
was thinking. But this is today, and this is the moment to have the regulations as tight as possible. And I agree with what the attorneys have said and also what my fellow commissioners have said.
You're not far out, Sandy. 6G is seriously, it's being worked on right now.
It is. Thank you, Steve. So I think we'll close commissioner comments, and if you could give us an update, Kim.
I would recommend that the planning commission continue the public hearing to May 24th.
Okay.
And take a formal action.
Okay.
So moved.
I'll second.
I'm not going to be here on the 24th, and I'm sorry about that, but I think some other people are not going to be here either, but I think it's a good date.
Well,
We do have a.
this is Hanson, and is there a date in June that we should move it to? I mean, can we move it to the, I mean, I would hate to have, we're all 7 here today,
I know.
and I would be happy to amend my motion if there's another date in June that would work.
I agree. I think this is an item that we all need to be here for.
So it would be the 14th of June would be the first meeting in June.
I will not be here. 14th.
Are you here on the 28th of June? Is everybody here on the 28th of June?
28th, yeah.
Yes.
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 Yes, I'm here as well. So I amend my motion to continue to June 28th.
Yeah, I'll amend my second.
Okay, motion has been made to go up on this meeting on June the 28th. Is there any discussion of the motion? All right. Jennifer, you want to take the vote, please?
Of course, we have Chair Freeman first,
Yes.
Vice Chair Reed,
Yes.
Commissioner Brassfield,
Muted.
possibly
You're
muted,
muted.
Yes.
Commissioner Dawson,
Yes.
Commissioner Fletcher,
Yes.
Commissioner Latassa,
Yes.
and Commissioner Milich.
Yep.
Thank you. This item is continued to June 28th of this year.
And do you have any other further comments today?
I do not.
Oh,
Thank
well,
you though for your participation.
thank you everyone for attending, especially our members of the public. And what a job you've done, Kim, really. The ordinance, the gathering of information from the subcommittee meetings. This is a huge project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't, it's been a team effort with Ms. Davi, Mr. Van Eaton, Ms. Koresh, getting the correct help to understand all of these issues, and I'm very appreciative.
Yeah. With that, this meeting is adjourned.